Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you, but before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck tech is going to be centered around Torsten, founder of Benalia. For 5 colorless, 1 green and 1 white, it's a legendary creature, human soldier 7/7, with when Torsten, founder of Benalia, enters the battlefield, reveal the top 7 cards of your library. Put any number of creature and or land cards from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And when Torsten dies, create 7/1/1 white soldier creature tokens. So if you've followed me for any amount of time, you'll know that I don't particularly like Selesnya decks, but that I really like themed decks. I get bored with decks very quickly, so I tend to want to make decks that can stand the test of time. And that's kind of where Torsten has come in a little bit. So some of the themed decks I've made in the past is an all multicolor deck, which is still one of my favorites, and I still have it built right now and play it quite regularly. My recent Ruby deck is also one of my favorites, and that one has a pretty strong restriction in that there's basically only 2 or 3 cards in the deck that cost 3 mana or less. So when I was looking for a new deck to build, I stumbled upon Torsten in my bulk pile, and I was like, wait a minute, this guy is incredibly strong. But he has a very specific build around restriction, which is that he can only draw you creatures and lands. So basically I started building the deck, and I was like, you know, this is sometimes going to whiff and draw me only a few cards. Maybe that's not as good when you're spending 7 mana on it. And that's when it hit me that I should just go all out on the theme. So I've built a full creature deck in the past with Roric Thar, which is also a blast to play. And I decided, hey, why not try to do that and see if it can fix my dislike for Selesnya by having a deck that just draws you 7 cards when you play your commander, straight up. You do need to reveal them to your opponent, but that is still incredible value for 7 mana. And then it means that we also don't need to put that many draw spells in the deck, because our commander is essentially refilling our hand whenever we play him. Obviously, he also synergizes with tokens, but we're not really building around that as much. We're just building a full-on creature deck where we have a couple of ways to blink him. And I've played this deck a couple of times so far, and it's an absolute blast to play every time. It's super fun. There's a lot of cool interaction because since I'm running only creatures, I can stuff the deck full of effects that I really like. The other cool thing about this deck is that it's a budget deck. It basically comes in at around $100, which I think is very reasonable for a deck that performs as well as this one does. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into this deck tech. And we're going to start off with our Blink and Recast package. First Responder is a really cool card that I've wanted to try for a while. It can grow very big whilst also returning a creature to our hand. Returning our commander is particularly good because we don't have to pay commander tax, and we just have a basically draw 7 spell in our hand at any time. And then First Responder also immediately gets 7 counters. Fortune Loyal Steed has impressed me a lot so far. We have a lot of ETB effects in the deck, so this can just be really good by getting something like Wood Elves over and over and ramping into our commander. But of course, if we have our commander out, it gets really silly. Restoration Angel is a classic, and having Flash is really nice. It can protect one of your important creatures or just rebuy some enter the battlefield abilities such as those on your commander. Temur Sabertooth gives us a creature that can survive board wipes whilst also rebuying ETBs from our other creatures. This kind of effect is important in the deck. We have a couple of creatures that can become indestructible, and the reason for that is because obviously we can't run anything like Heroic Intervention because we're not running anything that isn't a creature. If you wanted to add a little bit more blink to the deck, then Guardian of Girapur would be a good option. I don't have it in here because I basically don't know what to cut for it. Moving on to our draw effects, starting off we have Aura and Frostfang. This is obviously insane with all of the creatures we're running. Some of them are going to connect, and we're just going to draw cards off of them. Sharp-Eyed Rookie grows very easily in this deck. We have a lot of high power and toughness creatures, and it's going to make us clue tokens that we can then sack whenever we need to. This is particularly good since our commander fills up our hand, so it's nice to have cards stored where we can draw them later rather than them clogging up our hand. And Toski, Bearer of Secrets, is basically another copy of Aura and Frostfang that's really hard to remove, which works well since we need a lot of cards that don't die to board wipes. Moving on to our recursion package, we have Angel of Serenity, which is really good in this deck. It can either get some blockers out of the way from our opponents, which can sometimes be enough to just win you the game, but it can also just get some stuff back from your graveyard so that when it dies, you get them all back into your hand. Either way, it's a very strong effect. Emeria Shepherd is a card that I absolutely love, and it's going to work very nicely in this deck. We have quite a few planes, so we should be able to get full value off of it. Guardian Scalelord can immediately allow us to recur a permanent from our graveyard, and then next turn, if it's still alive, it can do the same itself. Karmic Guide is a classic reanimation spell. It's really good in this deck, particularly with all the ways to blink it. Redemption Choir is a card that I really like as a mini Sun Titan effect. Revelok provides a great amount of value in this deck. We have a lot of powerful creatures with power 2 or less. And Sun Titan is an absolute classic and can recur most of our early game creatures. Moving on to our finishes, we have Champion of Lamhold. This is a great way to finish the game. game, it grows bigger and bigger, and if they don't remove it, we can just swing through with all of our creatures. Injuries, Forerunners is a nice and budget way to finish off the game by giving all of our stuff +2/+2 and trample. Moonshaker Cavalry isn't that budget, so feel free to substitute it for something else, but I happen to have it in the collection, and it's a great way to finish the game. And Nylea, God of the Hunt, also isn't that budget, but it is nice to be able to give all of our creatures trample. You could again substitute it for any number of fun cards that you have in your collection. For Graveyard Hate, we're running Kutil's Flanker. This is a card that I've wanted to try out for a while. It's also a really good insurance against board wipes. As we mentioned, we're quite weak to that, so it's nice to have an answer to them. Ravenous Slime is a card that I really like against graveyard decks. It grows until it becomes very big, it's difficult to block, and it messes with your opponent's graveyards. What's not to like? Scavenging Ooze is an old classic that can mess with our opponents at instant speed. Very good card. For protection, we're not running that much. We have Sarith the Viper's Fang, which is a good way to make sure our stuff doesn't get targeted by spot removal. Speaking of removal, we're running Aerial Extortionist, which is a card that I really like in the deck. We've got a couple of cards that care about our opponents playing stuff from exile, and this is really solid. Angel of the Ruins is really nice because it gives us a play on turn 2 if we're short on lands that allows us to then reanimate it later, but otherwise we can just hang on to it and exile 2 artifacts or enchantments. Aven Interrupter is incredibly solid in this deck. It's very good for messing with our opponents, and if it hits a counterspell, they don't even get to ever cast the card, so it's just very powerful. It also combos really nicely with Aerial Extortionist. Bounty Agent gives us a nice source of removal that we can reanimate with all of our recursion effects. The same goes for Cankerbloom. This is a really solid way to mess with our opponents, and the Proliferate is even relevant in certain situations. Duplicant is an old school card, but it's still a pretty clean removal for a creature. Green Slime I really like. Nobody's going to know what this is if you foretell it. They're probably going to think it's Doomscar or something. And then you can just surprise somebody by countering an ability, which is really rare, and then destroying whatever the permanent was. Lauren of the Third Path is really good. It's super cheap right now to pick up, and it's a great way to deal with stuff on ETB. Mass Vandal gives us yet another cheap way to deal with our opponent's permanents, and since we have so many creatures in the deck, the cost of exiling a creature card from our graveyards should be fairly easy to meet. And Steel Hellkite gives us a nice way to deal with multiple permanents at one if we connect with it. Moving on to ramp, we have Beanstalk Giant and Fertile Footsteps. This still counts as a creature for our commander's purposes, but we can play it on turn 3. Circle of Dreams Druid is going to add so much mana in this deck with all of the creatures we're playing. Elvish, Mystic, and Llanowar Elves are just classic 1 mana dorks. Eternal Dragon I'm loosely counting as ramp because it's very nice to cycle it and get a land when we're short on lands. Farhaven Elf, Wood Elves, and Yavimaya Dryad basically all do the same thing. They ramp us 1 land for 3 mana. Gala Greeters comes down on turn 2 and then can ramp us essentially every time we play a creature by giving us a tapped treasure token each turn. Greater Tanuki is yet another card that can channel itself to ramp. Intrepid Paleontologist allows us to mess with graveyards whilst also ramping us. This is great for covering our bases. Parametra, God of Harvest, is one of the best ways to ramp in Selesnya. It's just so much value. Torsten Tusker is yet another card that can basically be played on turn 7, or it can be cycled to basically draw us 2 cards. Sakura Tribe Elder is a very clean ramp on turn 2 that also is a creature. Selvala Eager Trailblazer can make it super trivial to play our commander, and it's going to give us a really nice board as well. Shaman of Forgotten Ways can really ramp out our creatures nice and early, and Solemn Simulacrum is just another good card that ramps on ETB. Finally, I wanted to talk about a few cards that we haven't mentioned yet. Arms Collector is really fun as a way to blow out people that aren't expecting it. It's good to have a bunch of flash creatures in a deck like this. Conclave Siege Captain can be an impressive way to win the game in a couple of turns. This is one of the cards that I would recommend cutting if you don't know what to cut though, because it is just a bit of a pet card. Horner Shaman allows us to search for any non-land card in our deck, which is insane. Forgotten Ancient, Managorger Hydra, and Thundering Nightmare all do similar things. I really like all 3 of these cards. They grow really huge without much investment on your part. Guardian of New Benalia is one that you might consider cutting. I wanted to try it out because the idea was we'd have a bunch of cards in hand that we could discard to give it indestructible, but it hasn't really impressed me that much. Scavenge Brawler can be really good to cast outright, but then since we're going to be drawing so many cards, we're probably going to discard a bunch of them, and this is great to scavenge from our graveyard. Selfless Squire and Windshaper Planetar are both amazing ways to turn a loss into a potential win out of nowhere. Sark the Hunt Caller can give our creatures haste, which is pretty valuable in a green-white deck. 10th District Hero I found to be really powerful. We fill our graveyard quite a bit in this deck because our creatures are naturally going to die, and this becomes such a must deal with card after we collect evidence a couple of times. Torrin's Fist of the Angels provides a steady stream of creatures that are going to grow as we attack. And finally, Trostani Selesnya's Voice is a great way to gain life by the boatload. It's always nice to have a couple of ways to gain life in a deck. We also do randomly have a couple of token makers, so populating might even come up sometimes as well. So there you have it. That has been my Torsten, founder of Benalia deck tech. I never thought I'd find myself enjoying a Selesnya deck this much, but here I am. Sometimes life surprises you, I guess. But what do you think? Would you be willing to commit this hard to a deck idea? Let me know in the comments comment section below. I always make sure to read all of your comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.